The Wealthy Widow and the Stranger at Snow Creek Station. The first snowstorm of December swept across the Wyoming frontier with a cruelty that left even the toughest cowboys praying for sunrise. The wind howled through Snow Creek Station, carrying sharp flakes that stung like tiny knives. Margaret Hayes, the wealthiest widow in the county, stepped off the evening train wearing a long navy blue coat trimmed with fur. At 32, she had everything money could buy: land, cattle, and the largest ranch in the territory. Everything except someone to love. 3 years earlier, her husband had died in a ranch accident, leaving her with a fortune and a heart that had forgotten how to smile. As she walked toward her carriage, something caught her eye. A man sat alone on a frozen wooden bench near the station entrance. His coat was torn, his boots nearly falling apart, and snow covered the brim of his old black cowboy hat. His arms wrapped tightly around himself, trying to stop the shivering. Beside him sat a little girl, no older than 6, asleep against his shoulder beneath a thin blanket. Margaret slowed her steps. "Sir," she called gently. The man looked up with tired blue eyes. "Are you all right?" He forced a weak smile. "We're fine." But the lie was obvious. The little girl's lips had turned pale from the cold. Margaret noticed the empty food sack beside them. "When did you last eat?" The man hesitated. "My daughter ate yesterday." "And you?" He looked away. "I don't remember." Margaret's heart tightened. "What is your name?" "Ethan Carter." "And your daughter?" "Lucy." Margaret removed her warm wool scarf and wrapped it around Lucy. "You'll both freeze if you stay here." "I can't accept charity." "It isn't charity," Margaret replied softly. "It's an invitation." Ethan stared at her, suspicious. "Why would a woman like you help strangers?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Because once, someone helped me when I thought my life was over." She extended her gloved hand. "Come home with me." The Hayes Ranch stood proudly on a snowy hill overlooking miles of white fields. Inside, roaring fireplaces filled every room with warmth. Lucy opened her eyes and gasped. "Daddy, is this a castle?" Margaret laughed. "It feels like one sometimes." The housekeeper quickly prepared hot soup, fresh bread, roasted chicken, and apple pie. Lucy ate until she couldn't take another bite. Ethan, however, barely touched his food. Margaret noticed. "You still don't trust me." "I've learned not to trust luck." "What happened?" He sighed. "I lost my ranch." Margaret listened quietly. "My wife died giving birth to Lucy." He swallowed hard. 2 years of drought destroyed my crops. The bank took everything. I searched for work in 3 territories. No one wanted a cowboy with a child. So we kept moving." Margaret looked toward Lucy sleeping beside the fireplace. "You never abandoned her." "Never. I promised my wife I'd protect her." Those words echoed inside Margaret's lonely heart. The next morning Ethan woke before sunrise. He walked outside and quietly began repairing broken fences without being asked. By noon he had fixed the barn doors. By evening he had chopped enough firewood for an entire week. Margaret watched from her office window. Most men admired her money. This man respected honest work. Over the next month Ethan became the hardest working ranch hand she'd ever seen. The workers respected him. Lucy filled the silent mansion with laughter. For the first time since her husband's death, Margaret looked forward to coming home. One snowy afternoon Lucy handed Margaret a small drawing. It showed 3 people standing together beneath a bright sun. "Who's this?" Margaret asked. Lucy smiled. "That's Daddy. And me. That's you." Margaret pointed to The little girl. And who's she? Lucy giggled. That's me. Margaret smiled. It's beautiful. Lucy tilted her head. I never had a mama. Margaret's smile faded. But, if you wanted, she whispered shyly, you could be mine. Margaret hugged the little girl tightly as tears filled her eyes. Not everyone welcomed Ethan. One evening, wealthy rancher Victor Langston arrived for dinner. Victor had wanted to marry Margaret ever since her husband died. When he saw Ethan sitting at her table, his face darkened. Who is he? My ranch manager. Victor laughed. A homeless drifter. Margaret answered calmly. An honest man. Victor leaned closer. People are talking. They think you've forgotten your place. My place? You're the richest widow in Wyoming. You should marry someone equal. Margaret looked directly into his eyes. A person's worth isn't measured by money. Victor stood. You'll regret this. He left, slamming the door behind him. A week later, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the horse stable during the middle of the night. Flames climbed into the sky. The frightened horses kicked against their stalls. Without hesitation, Ethan rushed inside. One by one, he untied every horse. The roof began collapsing. Margaret screamed. Ethan. A burning beam crashed behind him. Smoke filled the stable. Everyone believed he was trapped. Then, through the flames came Ethan carrying one frightened foal in his arms. He collapsed into the snow. Margaret ran to him. You fool. He smiled weakly. They were depending on me. She grabbed his hand. So am I. At that moment, both of them understood what their hearts had been hiding. Spring arrived, covering the valley with green grass and wildflowers. One afternoon, Ethan packed his saddlebag. Margaret found him saddling his horse. You're leaving. I have to. Why? I've already taken too much. You gave us hope. I gave you extra work. You gave Lucy a father she can be proud of. He looked away. I own nothing. Margaret stepped closer. I don't need another rich husband. I need a good man. Ethan's voice trembled. You deserve someone better. Margaret smiled through tears. I've met richer men. I've met more powerful men. But I've never met a kinder one. She reached into her pocket. It wasn't money. It wasn't a contract. It was a small silver ring that had belonged to her grandmother. My grandmother always said true love begins with respect. She held it out. Ethan Carter, will you build a new life with me? He couldn't speak. Instead, he gently slipped the ring onto his finger. Lucy came running across the yard. Does this mean we're a family? Margaret laughed. Yes. Lucy threw her arms around both of them. I wished for this every night. That summer, the Hayes Ranch became known throughout the frontier for something far greater than its wealth. Travelers who had nowhere to go always found a warm meal there. Widows found work. Orphans found shelter. Hungry cowboys found hope. Whenever people asked why the richest woman in Wyoming had married a penniless cowboy, Margaret always smiled and gave the same answer. I didn't rescue Ethan. He rescued the part of my heart that had frozen long before the winter ever came. And every evening, as the sun disappeared behind the western mountains, Ethan, Margaret, and little Lucy sat together on the ranch porch, watching the golden light stretch across the endless frontier. They had learned that true love is never found in riches, fine clothes, or grand houses. It is found in the simple courage to open your heart to someone who has almost given up on believing that love still exists. Sometimes, the greatest frontier a person will ever cross is the distance between loneliness and love, and together, they crossed it hand in hand. Please friends spot my channel, subscribe for more stories.